Remember back when the politicians actually talk about the environment? Now every time I watch the news, it's always about some of the things like war, something to do with Trump, mass layoffs, something about AI, as if nothing else really matters in the society anymore. To be fair enough, a lot of stuff has to do with Trump is relatively important, like the tariffs and everything, because it affects the economics so much. That being said, however, when was the last time that we saw something significant happen to the environment from the political side? US is one of the most unfortunate countries when it comes to environmental politics, simply due to how anti-environmentalism that President Trump is. It is almost guaranteed that no significant climate actions will be taken under the Trump administration. From what we have seen, Trump has done nothing much for the environment, and in fact that he has done things like withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, removing many subsidies related to environmentalism, such as climate research and renewable energies, and creating policies that are in favor of fossil fuels. Basically, if you want any environmental actions from the federal government, Trump will never be the choice for you. I think this is an unfortunate fact because of how much power the US hold, not in terms of military force, but how much resources and skills and knowledge they hold in order to make something happen. I said this before, but the current challenge for environmental action is not due to the lack of knowledge or technologies, but rather being able to put these technologies into practice. The US is no doubt the strongest country in the world right now, and yet the current federal government is not in favor for any environmental actions. That is a lot of missed opportunities for reducing human impact on the environment, especially the fact that we're in a climate crisis right now. Not to mention the fact that the US is also one of the top polluters in the world as well. But that is enough for the US. What about Canada? Even though the Canadian federal government under the Liberal leadership have implemented a few environmental policies, it was just simply not enough. Most notable policy being the controversial carbon tax that took in place under Justin Trudeau government. So from its name, you could probably already tell one thing why it was controversial. It is another tax that the federal government is trying to add. Everyone in the country pays their taxes, but no one likes to do that. Not to mention that it is going to increase on top of an already relatively high tax that we pay normally. And carbon tax is forced for all provinces and territories that do not hold their own carbon policies. Another reason is that carbon tax would theoretically increase the cost for consumer for the majority of the items that we buy, as companies shift the increased cost by carbon tax onto the consumers. Everything I talk about here for the carbon prices are just the tip of the iceberg, and there is a lot of explanation behind the carbon tax. But what you really need to know is that carbon tax or carbon pricing is a political economic system for the purpose of reducing carbon emissions. The carbon tax is not exactly a new concept. There have been talks about carbon tax before it was implemented across Canada. However, not only did it receive criticism from the public, it has also received criticism from the environmental side. Most major one being that the numbers for the carbon tax is just not high enough to see a reduction of a significant carbon emission. In a simple word, carbon tax that the federal government is charging is just too low. It has to be higher in order for carbon tax to be effective on reducing carbon emissions. That is of course much easier said from the environmental side than the government actually implementing. Because if a party comes in and suddenly charges a whole bunch of taxes, they will pretty much guarantee the loss for the next election. It will get backfired by various groups of people, including the general public. Therefore, theoretically, they are able to implement a higher carbon tax, but they wouldn't because it will risk their position. As a result, the effectiveness of carbon tax is nowhere to be found. Although the total carbon emission in Canada has decreased in the recent years, there are many other factors that are related to the decrease, and it is difficult to determine whether that a part of it is due to the carbon tax. This carbon tax policy has been removed by the current Carney Liberal government, in exchange for industrial carbon pricing. Quick note, carbon pricing is just another way to refer carbon tax. Both of them are the same thing. Whether this new industrial carbon pricing will be more beneficial than the previous carbon tax policy for the environment will be the story for another day. Aside from carbon tax, Canada also has other environmental policies, excluding what I would like to call the basic environmental legislation such as the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which regulates what can and cannot be emitted into the environment. The current existing policies and regulations, however, are not exactly doing anything aside from just setting a cap and a goal and call it a day. Unless the federal government aggressively support industries, specifically the energy sector, to achieve these goals, I don't think any of these regulations are going to be effective at all, since it isn't really a regulation or policy that the federal government is actively working towards too. The Liberal Party has been very questionable in the recent years in terms of what they're actually working towards for. The current situation in Canada is downright horrible for every aspect. The economic is unstable, there is no growing market, and in fact the majority of the market is going downhill. There are a lot of layoffs everywhere, and inflations are jacking up the prices of everything. Housing and job securities are in crisis as well. Crime rate has grown higher than ever, and there is an immigration crisis too. Just all in all, I have no idea what the current government has been doing for the last couple years. So many problems from every direction, and nothing seems to be resolved or even worked towards solving for. Like, come on, do something. The country is going downhill non-stop. As much as it sucks to talk about politics, there is no way to avoid it if you want to take actions for the environment. Environmental policy is the strongest tool to make climate actions, as it directly affects the major contributor to climate change. So naturally, you will vote for the party that have the environmental awareness and at least promise to take actions for the environment. However, there are so much more stuff in life than just the environment. Job security, opportunities, economics, social programs, healthcare, every single one of these factors influences on people's vote. And just because one party promises to take environmental actions, it doesn't mean that this party will be able to do a good job in other aspects. In addition to that, the party may not be doing everything that people with environmental awareness will agree with 100%. Conversely, if another party can do a greater job in aspects like job security, but they don't promise any environmental actions, that will also influence the vote for voters who have the environmental awareness, because not everyone is in the same situation in their life. At the end of the day, while environmental protections and policies are important, it isn't the only problem for people. Also, just because one party promises to take environmental actions, it doesn't mean that they will be taking enough environmental actions, or at least an effective environmental action, as we can probably see from the current state of Canada. The only thing that I can say about the current environmental action from the federal government is that at least something is being done. It is just an overall terrible state that we're in right now. Ideally, all political parties should care about the environment and climate change, but for some reason that is just not the case. A lot of it has to do with climate policy often affects the amount of money certain groups of people can make by overexploiting the environment. But anyways, that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Peace.